at the moment in Baghdad. Again, flashes of light, a lot of flashes of light, just across the Tigris, as I see at the moment, all across the Tigris. I don't know if you're picking any of this up.
David, we can, yeah, David, I mean, we are looking certainly at the locked-off position that your camera crew offered to us before you took to your beds for the night. We can see some trace of fire. We're not sure if it's trace of fire, but certainly some lights in the sky here from our position in the studio in London. We know that the White House has told Americans to prepare for war that will cost lives and last for an unknown time. But we also heard from Ari Fleischer that the president has said that he feels...
What you're listening to is a conversation live Baghdad through London. This is a live report. Air raid sirens have sounded over Baghdad. Some, what is believed to be anti-aircraft fire, has gone off. The indication is that an air raid is either in progress or about to be in progress over Baghdad. There's expected to be a White House briefing at any moment with Ari Fleischer, the official White House spokesman and press secretary, who perhaps can shed some light on this. Here's what we know. Sirens went off in Baghdad just a few minutes ago. Flashes of light over the city. David Chater, the CBS affiliated Sky News reporter, is there, and let's pick up now what he's saying while we wait for Ari Fleischer's briefing.
Not much of a necessary warning, frankly, looking across here. I don't see anybody at all, but still sent through already. There are army units on the street, but nobody is moving. The dogs are barking all across the city.
Some seconds left in this videotape replay now. And that was pretty much it. The Good Morning Baghdad sent by President Bush. That lasted on the order of, what, maybe a minute and a half, possibly as much as 2 minutes. Now, Andy Clark, one of our CBS News reporters and producers, has called in from Italy and saying that the U.S. Armed Forces radio said that this is, quote, a target of opportunity, and that the target of opportunity was, as David Martin reported a short while ago, what was believed to be a meeting of the Iraqi leadership. It may be some time, maybe a long time, who knows, before anyone can say, first of all, whether what are believed to be these Tomahawk missiles actually hit their targets, a fixed target where, for some reason, the United States thought there was a meeting of the Iraqi leadership, and if they hit the targets, what damage was done. I want to point out that White House spokesman Ari Fleischer, when he announced that President Bush would be speaking to the American people in now about 19 minutes from now at 10:15 Eastern Time, Ari Fleischer said that the opening phases of the disarmament of Iraq are underway. I underscore the phrase opening phases because there's a widespread belief, David Martin, our Pentagon correspondent, underscores this, that this is not the opening of main aerial bombardment campaign, which will be a prelude to a major ground force invasion. That still is apparently sometime off, perhaps a day or two away. We simply do not know. I want to go to Bill Plant, one of our CBS News White House correspondents. Bill, what do you know? What do you hear?
Dan, we've known all evening that something was up because the White House folks never let this thing drop. They never called it an evening. It was quite obvious that the president was probably going to speak tonight, though we were never told that as such. And even though, Dan, it appears that the war has probably not officially begun or begun in earnest, as David pointed out, it's no surprise that Mr. Bush is coming to speak this evening because he has been pressed repeatedly to tell the American people how much this war will cost in both lives and dollars. And his spokesman has said over and over again that the president will not once, but more than once, make the case to the American people for what he is about to do, the reasons he is doing it, and what it can be expected to cost. The White House today foreshadowed that just a little bit by reminding us for the first time that this will cost American lives. But we do expect to hear from the president, if not the specifics of what targets were struck, a justification for what he is doing, an explanation that this is now underway, that it will continue for some time, and that it will entail costs and sacrifices. Dan?
Bill Plant, live from the White House. Now, according to the Associated Press, which of course has eyewitnesses on the scene, as do we, and you heard our man in Baghdad through our Sky affiliation, David Chater, earlier described what was going on, but the movements of any reporters and the field of view of any reporters in Baghdad is extremely limited by the circumstances of where they are kept, if you will, and where they're allowed to go. But according to the Associated Press, no airplanes were visible in the skies over Baghdad as the air raid sirens blasted. Some yellow and white tracers from anti-aircraft fire were seen scattered about in the sky. And then a number of strong explosions went off in the city. That's what we replayed for you earlier. We had it on the air live, then we replayed it for you. Now, Associated Press says one explosion raised what they call a ball of fire toward the southern part of the capital. We do not know for sure what weapons were used in this attack, but the most reasonable analysis is that they were tomahawks fired probably from submarines or possibly ship-launched that were put on this target. Now, retired General Perry Smith is joining us here. General, put this in context and perspective for us, what we believe to be a hello, we're around, signature shot, but perhaps no more than that.
That's right, Dan, but I think it's important for us to kind of go through the phases of this war. There are 4 phases. Phase 1 is the decision to go to war, and that was taken 3 or 4 days ago. The second phase is the initial phase. The third phase is the decisive phase. And the fourth phase is the wrap-up or the reconstruction phase. We are now kind of between phase 1 and phase 2. As you correctly reported, this is not a major air attack. This is very different than we saw on the 16th of January, 1991. But it does allow us to send a signal, maybe take an opportunity, let everybody know that we're ready to go. But it is not we're not in phase 2 yet. That's clear to me.
I want to point out to our viewers and perhaps those who are just joining us, there has been an air attack of some kind in Baghdad, lasted about 2, maybe as long as 2.5 to 3 minutes. President Bush will be speaking to the American public about 13 minutes from now. We will, of course, carry that live from Washington. David Martin, our CBS News national security correspondent at the Pentagon, has reported that what's called a target of opportunity was picked up by U.S. intelligence. The president met with his military leaders in late afternoon, perhaps on into the evening. He gave the okay, the go-ahead for this attack. It came at sunrise Baghdad time. It's not lost on anyone that the attack began roughly an hour and a half, maybe a little less than that, after the passage of the deadline that President Bush had given to Saddam Hussein to either leave the country or face attack. I want to turn quickly to Buck Kernan, retired U.S. Army. General, give us your perspective in putting this in context. It does, for all the world, look like a one-shot, not literally one shot, but a one carefully calibrated attack, not necessarily the precursor to an immediate overall aerial bombardment, much less invasion.
I agree, Dan. Unquestionably, it's a rude wake-up call for Saddam Hussein and his leadership. I think it's going to give them pause to reflect on their vulnerability. There probably were a multitude of cruise missiles used. If the target was large enough, you'd want to make sure that you saturated that with sufficient munitions to get the kind of effect that you were looking for on that target. As David Martin said, we may get fortunate. This may cause a significant attitude change in Saddam Hussein and his leaders if we were fortunate enough to target effectively some of the senior Iraqi leadership.
What are the chances that there was also mixed in here a psychological dimension, that we would like to get Saddam Hussein up and moving around, would we not?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is going to cause them to really stop and look at to where they feel safe. We're going to create targets of opportunity as we service various targets throughout this campaign. So unquestionably, that will produce a psychological edge for us.
General Smith?
I think there's a point here that needs to be made. The 48-hour notice came to the point that we were very close to dawn, so it was not possible to run a full campaign at night the first night. But it was possible to do something very specific, very precise, in a very short period of time before dawn was set up. So I think this is not unexpected, but I agree with you. I think we're still probably 20 hours, 16 hours away, or maybe 48 hours away from a major air assault.
Let's go back to David Martin at the Pentagon. You see a live picture of Baghdad. Whatever was happening is over, all over now. We cannot say for certain it won't be something else. That's one reason we're leaving this picture up. And after we go to David Martin, and before the president speaks about 11 minutes from now, we'll try to rerun at least some of the video and audio tape to give you, again, the flavor of the attack while it was occurring. It went to about 2.5 and 3 minutes. There were some heavy booms in the night, and for a brief period, the blast of war was blowing in the ears of anyone in Baghdad. David Martin, live at the Pentagon.
Dan, the military has a term for this kind of attack. It's called decapitation, cut off the head of the leadership. And decapitation is hard to do. Usually you try to do it by knocking out their communications because you can't count on killing individual people. But if the intelligence was really good enough this time so they knew where individual people were to a certainty that allowed you to put a weapon on it from several hundred miles away, that alone will have to give the leadership of Iraq pause, because that would indicate that our intelligence is very, very good. This is probably the toughest intelligence target. Look how long we've been looking for Osama bin Laden, and Saddam Hussein spares no effort in protecting himself, and the leadership all lives in that same paranoid atmosphere where you're always looking over your shoulder. So if we can track leadership at this remove, that would seem to say we have Baghdad pretty well wired. But of course, I'm assuming that the intelligence was good. Frequently, intelligence is wrong. You hit what you think is a legitimate target in downtown Belgrade, and it turns out to be the Chinese embassy. So these things can go wrong as easily as they can go right.
General Gernan?
I think that's an excellent point, and the fact that we targeted a specific target, leadership in all probability, makes this personal. It's against the leadership of Saddam Hussein and not the Iraqi people.
Well, what we've had, very quickly, a target of opportunity, so-called. Perhaps a meeting of the Iraqi leadership was targeted. No doubt that part of the reason that this calling card, this signature was put on Baghdad at dawn. As you can see, the light is beginning to increase now that we have dawn in Baghdad. It's early Thursday morning there. That one of the purposes, unquestionably, was certainly to hit the target in hopes that that leadership meeting was there, but also to give Saddam Hussein perhaps a little case of the willies, to spook him a bit. Now, if the desire was to scare him out of his wits, you would see Baghdad lit up for hours. That, at least not yet, has been the purpose of the aerial bombardment. I want to now put the tape up again. This happened, this is going to be on videotape, where you will see and hear what happened in Baghdad just as dawn was breaking now, about maybe 40 minutes ago, maybe 40 or 50 minutes ago. I'm going to put it up and let you see and hear again. If you'd been in Baghdad, this is part of what you would have seen and heard. Now, most of this noise at the end of this videotape sequence is anti-aircraft fire. The big explosions, or what I call the huge explosions, early on in that sequence are believed to have been hits on something by Tomahawk missiles. This is an extremely destructive missile. The belief of the U.S. military is that it's also an extremely accurate missile, and with its accuracy, quote, dramatically increased from the time of the last Gulf War. And honest people could differ about how accurate it was in the last war, but worldwide, the agreement is this is a pretty precision weapon, always noting that no weapon can be made completely precision. We're going to go to Mark Phillips in Kuwait in just a moment, but first let me pass along a government official says now that U.S. forces launched what is called, and you knew this was coming, a, quote, surgical, unquote, military strike tonight targeting Iraqi leaders near Baghdad. This official says intelligence indicated Iraqi leaders were in the area. The official declined to name the leaders and would not say whether the attack was successful. Of course, it generally takes a while to determine whether launched missiles actually hit their targets or target, and if so, how precisely they hit them. That may take a while. General Kernan, interesting time. It's morning. Generally speaking, folks don't hold big meetings early in the morning.
That's correct. I mean, there's a possibility that they could have had a meeting in light of the fact that the 48-hour had just passed. But it is an interesting time. It could well have been an area where people were bivouacked. In other words, they had people staying there in an area where they thought they were safe, bunkered in, and there's a distinct possibility that if they had everybody in one of those facilities, they may have been able to target them.
I want to keep in mind that we're less than 5 minutes now from the time that President Bush is to speak to the United States and to the world. And in the meantime, General Perry Smith has something he wants to add. General?
Yeah, I think we ought to be careful here because it could be leadership of the military, it could be leadership of the party, it could be leadership of the intelligence community. It wouldn't necessarily mean that we had Saddam in our sights, but if we can kick down the support structure that holds Saddam in power, either in the party or in the military, the intelligence community, if we can kick that down, then that takes you to the tipping point. And when you get to the tipping point, the whole regime collapses. And then when we come in with all that overwhelming force, it's a lot easier for the military and other people to say, okay, the game's over. They've knocked out these major leadership pieces and it's time to quit. So this could be the first step of the knocking down and the tipping point of the end of the regime of Saddam Hussein.
New information is available. And we've been saying that the most likely weapon used in hitting this target of opportunity, as it's called tonight, apparently a one-time only for the time being anyway. Yet we're now told that a handful of cruise missiles, we don't know how many that is, a handful of cruise missiles, and it included using the F-117 stealth bombers. Now, that adds another dimension to this whole thing, does it not, General Smith?
Yes, indeed. Of course, the stealth fighter or the stealth fighter bomber was used a lot in the Gulf War. It was used in the Serbian War. It has been used in the Afghan War. It's a very good weapon. It has a 2,000-pound warhead that comes in at a different angle than a cruise missile, and as a result of that, can provide, in many ways, better damage and better targeting than the cruise missile. The combination of cruise missiles plus the 2,000-pound bombs, laser-guided bombs, very accurate, gives you a nice panoply of weaponry.
I want to make sure that people have clarity about these weapons. The missile is fired, and we think from a submarine or perhaps some surface naval vessel. We believe there's launched from submarines. It's a missile. It has its own guidance system. Now, the 117, a stealth bomber, it's vulnerable during the daylight hours, is it not?
That's correct.
Which would explain why they were eager to get in there before sunup.
That's right.
You don't normally fly the 117 when there's daylight, do you, General Kernan?
No, that's not. That's correct. We want to get back across friendly skies as quickly as possible.
Now, Dateline Baghdad, the main frequency of Iraqi state radio appeared to be taken over by the U.S. military as U.S. 117 stealth bombers and cruise missiles began hitting Baghdad just before dawn. According to a source, I'm not quite sure, this was an Iraqi announcer. He said, this is the day, no, an announcer said in Arabic, I'm wrong. They took over the frequency. Somehow they took over the Iraqi radio frequency, the main frequency, and an announcer speaking for the U.S. forces said, "This is the day we've been waiting for." He said in Arabic, shortly after the normal Iraqi broadcaster went off the air. Suddenly, within minutes of the U.S. airstrike starting, the announcer said Saddam Hussein's administration was under attack. Now, in addition to the 117 stealth bomber and the cruise missiles, there's a strong indication, at least in my mind, that this taking over the radio frequency may have something to do with the so-called EC-130E Commando Solo. It's a psychological operations broadcasting aircraft that can be used under these circumstances, right, General Cornett?
That's correct. It's the line of sight aircraft that can intercept both radio and television messages.
Now, in less than a minute, we believe that you're going to hear from the President of the United States, who will shed additional light on what has happened here over the last almost 1 hour now. Baghdad hit, the major explosions from the air, missiles and stealth bomber hits were heard for about 3 minutes' time. And CBS News has been on the air for almost an hour now. And one of the climatic moments will come up in about 20, 25 seconds as we go live to the White House for President Bush's address to the nation. He'll be speaking from the Oval Office. He will be addressing the nation and, of course, in particular, the servicemen and women and the families of those servicemen and women.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. More than 35 countries are giving crucial support, from the use of naval and air bases, to help with intelligence and logistics, to the deployment of combat units. Every nation in this coalition has chosen to bear the duty and share the honor of serving in our common defense. To all the men and women of the United States Armed Forces now in the Middle East, the peace of a troubled world and the hopes of an oppressed people now depend on you. That trust is well placed. The enemies you confront will come to know your skill and bravery. The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military. In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality. Saddam Hussein has placed Iraqi troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for his own military, a final atrocity against his people. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. A campaign on the harsh terrain of a nation as large as California could be longer and more difficult than some predict. And helping Iraqis achieve a united, stable, and free country will require our sustained commitment. We come to Iraq with respect for its citizens, for their great civilization, and for the religious faiths they practice. We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people. I know that the families of our military are praying that all those who serve will return safely and soon. Millions of Americans are praying with you for the safety of your loved ones and for the protection of the innocent. For your sacrifice, you have the gratitude and respect of the American people. And you can know that our forces will be coming home as soon as their work is done. Our nation enters this conflict reluctantly, yet our purpose is sure. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines so that we do not have to meet it later with armies of firefighters and police and doctors on the streets of our cities. Now that conflict has come, the only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force. And I assure you, this will not be a campaign of half measures, and we will accept no outcome but victory. My fellow citizens, the dangers to our country and the world will be overcome. We will pass through this time of peril and carry on the work of peace. We will defend our freedom. We will bring freedom to others, and we will prevail. May God bless our country and all who defend her.
President Bush speaking live from the White House after a U.S. air attack believed to be carried out by Tomahawk cruise missiles and F-117 stealth bombers, a short and it was hoped precise attack on what is believed to have been some place where parts of the Iraqi leadership, did it include Saddam Hussein in the intelligence report? We simply don't know. You heard it, but let's underscore and italicize one thing that President Bush said, and that is that the war in Iraq could be longer and more difficult than some predict. The President said the U.S. and its allies will make every effort to spare the lives of innocent civilians. We go to the Pentagon and CBS National Security Correspondent David Martin. David?
Dan, one other thing the President said is that this will not be a campaign of half measures. Well, if what we saw tonight were all there were, it would be a campaign of half measures. Those are the kinds of strikes that the U.S. used to launch against Iraq during the 12 years between the end of the first Gulf War and now up to the eve of what's going to be the second Gulf War. There was the famous strike that President Clinton ordered in retaliation for the plot to assassinate George Bush's father on a visit to Kuwait. And that was a strike using cruise missiles against the headquarters of the Iraqi intelligence service. So this is like that. This kind of one-time shot, perhaps not of revenge, but going after a target of opportunity. And it would only be a half measure if that were all there were to it, but I think it's probably only the beginning of a very substantial air campaign followed by a very substantial ground campaign.
David, I want to let you go so you can catch that phone. I'm afraid some source is calling you and you'll miss it, so I'll let you go and we'll get back to you.
Gone now.
Let's pause and absorb this fact, which is a fact. How different from the 1991 start of the war from now. The last one started with the now famous light and sound show, infamous to some, famous to those who were pulling for the United States and coalition forces. This one starts with what the military hopes is a precision strike, a, quote, surgical strike against what is believed to have been a place where the leadership of Saddam Hussein's party was meeting. This strike to demonstrate the very different goals in 2003 from the 1991 start of the war. At that time, let us remember, the purpose of the Gulf War was to expel Saddam Hussein and his forces from Kuwait. That is not the case with this war that has started, however you want to cut it. This is the start of the war. It may be hours or days before the main aerial campaign starts, followed by an invasion, but by any reasonable analysis, this is the start of the war. Now, the objectives this time are much broader and much more difficult to accomplish, and no one should be mistaken about that, as President Bush tried to make clear. The objectives this time are to disarm Iraq, free the Iraqi people, and, as President Bush has said, save the world from danger, and to crush, completely decapitate the regime of Saddam Hussein, which has been described the world over as a regime built along the lines of what Joseph Stalin did in the Soviet Union in the 30s, 40s,